Hey, what's up, everybody? My name's Adam Brownell. I am a data scientist, and unfortunately, I watched Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3 recently, and I was so inspired that I made a video about it entitled Why Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3, The Long Night was objectively bad. And before I get into my reasons, we got to add some context to this question. First two of those being, what is Game of Thrones and what is this problem? So for Game of Thrones, for those who don't know, Game of Thrones is a 5-book series written by George R.R. Martin. It was picked up by HBO in its 8th season, and basically sum up the show in one sentence: you either sit on the throne and are in charge of everybody, or you die. That's not something I made up. That's literally the tagline of the show. And I think it goes without saying, but spoilers ahead, I'm talking about Season 8, Episode 3. If you haven't watched up to there, you're not going to like what I'm about to say. I know everyone likes, bashing Game of Thrones, but proceed at your own risk. And then going to the other side of this equation, what's the problem? Well, the problem is it was terrible. The episode was so bad. But whenever I try to talk about it with my friends and I bring up things like, the dialogue is bad, they're dumbing down all the characters, it was a war show with terrible military strategy, just overall it's too dark to see, or just it was trying to be Helm's Deep and it just clearly wasn't. I get back, hey man, that's your opinion. It's all subjective, I liked it. It led me to say, how can I prove it's objectively a terrible episode? Which is a strange thing to do for a TV show, but then I had an idea. And that idea was centered around this idea that Game of Thrones prides itself on subverting fantasy tropes. That's what it's built a fan base around, that's what it strives to do. And Game of Thrones prides itself on killing off important characters at pivotal episodes. So that led me to the bigger question, which is, how impactful was each death in Game of Thrones? And can I assign them a death score? With that in mind, if I find out the higher the death score, the more pivotal the episode, that being the line of thinking. And there's two parts to this question. The first one is calculating death importance. How important was someone's character's death at a certain point in the show? And then the second part is calculating 8.3's expectations. What was the death score we assumed would happen for this episode? So we're going to start with calculating death importance, and I'm going to kind of walk through the strategies I used and try to figure out what number made the most sense. And obviously the first one we went after is just total screen time. Here's the graph of the total screen time for the show. You can see big spikes at pivotal moments like Ned Stark's death, his execution, the Red Wedding, the Wildling invasion, the Tyrell massacre, taking a huge spot. But when you start to look at it deeper, you see some glaring holes. Some of those being that it rewards later deaths. If you're a middling character who limps his way to 200 minutes by season 8, you are as valuable of a death as Ned Stark in season 1, which just isn't true. There's something about how much screen time you get per episode that is important to capture. And again, Ned and Viserys being worse less than the Wildling invasion, just as a Game of Thrones fan, is just unacceptable. So I went to the next obvious answer, which is minutes per episode. So dividing, how much screen time they have by the number of episodes they were in, and you can see Ned Stark and Viserys, which is episode 6, they're greatly emphasized in this version, almost to a fault, to the point that this metric, minutes per episode, it's very harsh to people who are killed off later. In fact, if you die in season 2, you have to have twice as much screen time as someone in season 1 just to be of equal death value, which seems a little too harsh. And this is epitomized by Ned and Viserys being worth more than every single character killed in seasons 4, 5, 6, and 7 combined. Clearly not the correct metric. So we have to do something more sophisticated. Let's jump out, and we're going to introduce a concept called death value. Basically a formula for calculating Game of Thrones death importance. And so the first thing we're going to add to this equation is a survivorship bonus. The idea that you'll gain some extra screen time just by progressing in the show. The later the show, the more valuable the death. This hopefully will dampen that minutes per episode drop off that we saw. There's a formula on there, and then here's the graph. And at first glance, it looks great. Ned's execution is huge, very important, but so is the Tyrell massacre later in the show. And then the other spikes are also pivotal moments like the Red Wedding, the Wildling invasion, and Stannis. It's looking pretty promising. But there's one thing that while I was doing this research, I noticed something strange. And that's right here, Season 1, Episode 1. Why is it such a high score? 6 may not seem that high, but that's almost half the value of Red Wedding. Who even died in the first episode? And that's what led me to discover the Will dilemma. There's a picture of our protagonist, Will, obviously one of the most important characters in the show. And the reason why it's a dilemma is look at this chart I have, denoting the top 5 most important characters based on death value. Number 1, Ned Stark, classic. Protagonist of season 1, brutally killed off, huge character, clearly worth a very high death score. Followed by Catelyn Stark, the mother of the Starks, killed in the Red Wedding, also very much deserving a high death value. Robert Baratheon, the king of Westeros, who died, whose death leads to the events of the entire show. And then Will, this no name, unnamed, no last name character. Nobody remembers. He had the first 6 minutes of the show and then was immediately killed off. But the fact that he died in the first episode, had 6 minutes, gives him a higher death value than Robb Stark, who's clearly a protagonist. That's just not true. And it really messed with the death value score. So I had to try to figure out what to do next. And while thinking about it, it came to me, you gotta make Game of Thrones like Mean Girls. You gotta make it a popularity contest. This being that important characters should have higher important scores and less important characters should just have lower scores. And by importance, how do we calculate popularity in this show? Well, I found a data set that counted every link in each character's Wikipedia page, Wikipedia fan page, and tallied them up and then normalized them between 0 and 1. So if you have a score of 1, you are the most popular character in all of Game of Thrones, and if you have a score of 0, you don't even really exist in the Game of Thrones universe, and your score is useless. And I give you some output of that. You can see these characters. Viserys Targaryen, pivotal character, high popularity score. Walder Frey, the orchestrator behind Red Wedding, very high popularity score. Followed by these less characters: Addison Hill, Emmy Aaron, Sylvia Santargar. Are they even in Game of Thrones? I don't think so. I made up one of them. You can look up. But they have low popularity, so even if they're like Will and have this artificially high death value, it's going to be decreased with this popularity modulator. So, crisis averted, the Will dilemma solved. We can use this popularity modulator to tweak our death value ever so slightly so that important characters maintain this strength and value and lesser characters not as much. And this is the graph we get, which first you can see is scaled down because a lot of minor characters have been wiped off this map. But in doing so, we have accentuated clearly important events. Ned and Viserys' death in episode 6, season 1, still the most popular, most valuable, followed by the Tyrell massacre and then the Red Wedding. I would argue those are the 3 most important ones, and they're all head and shoulders above the competition. So that's great. And this is something I was pretty excited about. I hope you're happy with where we got and the values this we get. If you want to see this written as a math formula for fun, congrats everybody. We've written a math formula that looks like this. This looks very complicated. You're a data scientist. While making this chart over the last few days, I wanted to talk about some intangibles that I wish deeply I could have added into the model, but there's just no way for me to add this without adding some subjectivity, which is the whole point, is to avoid that. So the first one is called the Hodor effect. When a minor character has a truly epic and memorable death, that should raise his or her death value. So Hodor, small minor character in Bran Stark's storyline, his death was impactful and one of the best in the series, and I would say his death value should be higher. I can't really add that because that's a subjective score of me thinking Hodor's death is more valuable. And the flip side of that is the Littlefinger quandary. When a major character like Littlefinger, his storyline gets a little smushed and crinkled, and his death is a little cheapened, and I would argue his death value should be smaller than it was in my calculations, which is unfortunate, but I couldn't reflect that either. The other one is either Ygritte hypothesis, wherein if a character shows up later in the show, do they gain the survivorship bonus from the previous episodes because they were alive but they didn't start until later? And does their episode start when they start? How did that work into it? I decided in the end to use Occam's razor. Everyone starts at season 1, episode 1, and it's assumed that if you just show up in season 3, you've been alive, you get no screen time, but you get that survivorship bonus. And it seems to have worked out. And then the final one is more just a larger point outside of Game of Thrones, which is the Master of Whispers bonus, where major characters oftentimes are talked about when they're not in the room, when they're off screen, and that should add to their importance. There's lots of characters, Varys is one of them, that people talk about all the time when he's not in the room, and so his value should go much higher, but screen time wise, he's not as high. So I wish I could, maybe next time, I'll train some bot that can listen in and know when Jon Snow is being talked about, even when Jon Snow's not in the room. But anyway, we've got our death value. Congrats. And now let's do what we came here to do, which is apply it to season 8, episode 3. So right away, not going to hold it back. Here is the death value score for The Long Night. It's a 10.48, which looks great. It's the 4th most deadly or most valuable, depending on what you say, episode in the series. What could you complain about? Well, if you dig a little deeper, you see some major flaws with this score. The first one is only one character, the top half of death values, was even killed off, Theon. Everyone else was spared in this supposedly epic battle of the end of a huge story arc. The 2 lowest characters left at the battle were killed off, Lyanna and Ed. They were worth basically nothing. And finally, nearly a quarter of the death value from this episode happened after the battle. Melisandre wasn't even killed in the battle. She only died after the battle when she decided her pep talk with Arya was her life's purpose, and she walked out to the snow and then immediately aged 100 years and died instantly. So a little bit robbed of that death value. Kind of goes to the Littlefinger quandary. But I just want to point that out. But you may remain unconvinced. You can say, Adam, so what? It wasn't as good as you thought, but it was still a great episode, so lots of people died. It still has a high death value. Maybe you just wanted everybody to die. Maybe that's what your expectations were. That's unrealistic. And I just wanted to verify that everyone dying is a ridiculous idea. And just showing what the death value score is. If everybody at Winterfell died, if the Night King swooped in with his undead horde and razed the castle to the ground and nobody made it out, Starks, the Targaryens, the Wildlings, everybody's gone. That would be a episode of insane proportion beyond anything we could expect. It would totally change the entire show. The last 2 episodes would be, based on the Night King versus Cersei, no longer Dany or anybody like that. So it would totally change the show, and it's reflected in this ridiculous score. But I do want to note that the Night King versus Cersei would be still a Song of Ice and Fire. So potential, George R. R. Martin, that could be your ending for the books. But I just wanted to show what that looked like, and then I wanted to find what people's expectations was, not just mine, but other people. So I went online and found an article that listed the people that they expected to die based on, foreshadowing, things like that, and adding up that death value expectation, we got a score of 12.76. 12.76 is higher. It's about the score of Red Wedding. And then I looked at my own predictions. Who did I think? Even though I had a different list of people, I still had a very similar score. I had 12.78. So within 0.02 or 1/4 a Gilly death value score with what mass media predicted. So I think that's what people's general expectations were at some sense. I also want to note that the Night King is not included in any of these deaths, including the actual ones, because according to the writers, the Night King is an elemental who is not subject to any human things like dying or character development. But anyway, so people expected something around 12.75, 12.78, and we received something that was 10.48. And how much less is that than what we got? This leads to the line, The Long Night was objectively 17.99% worse than everyone expected. And that's an objective claim based on the death value score that we walked through. I'm very satisfied that I could prove without a shadow of a doubt that that this episode fell short of expectations by quite a lot, nearly 20%. Thank you for watching. If you want to know what to do next steps, actually, Retina, the company I'm with right now, we just built a death value calculator, where I took this metric that we've walked through for the last 10 minutes or so, and you can put in what your expectations for the season finale are and see where it stacks up. Are you overhyped? Are you thinking everyone's going to die? Are you thinking not that many people are going to die? Where does everyone stack up? One thing I can tell you, which you should go check out the thing, Tyrion has a higher death value score than Dany, which is a really interesting thing to see. But again, thank you for watching. My name's Adam. I hope that you agree with my objective analysis of Game of Thrones, and hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.